There's a paradox here. If I had not suffered,
conscious practice. What's conscious? This is V, and today I'll be responding to Eckhart Tolle's video on the end of suffering. My name is V. I love all things meditation, yoga, and wisdom based. Super grateful to have you watching this with me right now. Eckhart Tolle is one of the first spiritual teachers I came across, and I'm super excited to get into this video.
you won't surrender, which means, surrender means only accept this moment as it is. But you won't be able to surrender unless you're completely fed up with suffering. You've had enough suffering. And at some level, you recognize that most of your suffering is self-created. It is created out of resistance to what is. It is created out of an interpretation of something that is. It comes from a thought, from an interpretation, not from the situation. So you realize really that I've had enough suffering, and only when you've truly had enough suffering in your life are you able to say, I don't need it anymore. Suffering is a wonderful teacher. Suffering is most people's only spiritual teacher. And suffering deepens you. It gradually erodes the mind-made sense of self, the ego. And for some people, the point arrives where they realize, I have suffered enough. And that, for example, is the case with almost all the people who come to a retreat. If you ask them, they've all had their share of human suffering. Otherwise they wouldn't be open to the message. They've had their share of human suffering, and they have reached a point where they are ready to listen to the message that says there is another way to live. There is another way in which you can live that does not create further suffering for yourself. Because to a large extent humans create their own suffering. And so when you are ready to hear that message, and that's really the message that is in every religion, that's the message, the central message of Buddhism is the end of suffering. And even the central message of the teaching of Jesus is finding the pearl of great price, finding the kingdom of heaven that is within you here and now, as Jesus says. And that, of course, is the end of living in a state of suffering. So one could say that you need suffering for you to realize, for you to come to a point of realization that you do not need to suffer anymore. There's a paradox here. If I had not suffered, this teaching would not exist. So you could say it has come partly as a result of intense suffering. Because as a human being, I would not have evolved spiritually if I had not suffered. So suffering was my main teacher, and suffering is for many people their main teacher. But then some people when they are ready, they come into contact with a spiritual teaching or teacher, and that can speed up the process of realization that you don't need to suffer anymore. You're ready to hear that. So that was, the Buddha talked about nothing else already 2,600 years ago, that there can be an end to self-inflicted suffering. And when you don't inflict suffering on yourself anymore, and remember, it's the thoughts. Your thoughts make you suffer more than anything else. It's not usually the situation, it's your interpretation of the situation, of how dreadful it all is. And so when you see that, then you see there is another way to live in which I no longer mentally argue with what is. And that's the end of self-inflicted suffering. And if I no longer inflict suffering on myself, I no longer inflict suffering on others, because the two go together.
Short, yet sweet, and very beautiful video. Super grateful for you watching it till now. Also, before I continue, if you have any other video reaction requests or topics you want me to react to in the future, comment down below. The end of suffering. This, like I said before, is very short and sweet, yet very powerful. It's all about realizing, and I like the delicate use of the words he had in the video on how the thoughts are most of the causing factors for the suffering. Most is the key word. Not all, most. And I can see where he's coming from, because he also says this, and I think Epictetus, a famous Greek philosopher, talks about it too, but usually it's never the situation that makes you upset, but it's the thoughts around it. Literally goes back to perspective, how you view things. That's why meditation is such a powerful tool, because when you meditate, you're creating distance between what is you and your thoughts. That way you're not so reactive. And you could, in a way, pick and choose how you respond and reframe your perspective too, accordingly. That way you're always in this mode of appreciation or just non-compulsiveness. Now, with regards to suffering being needed, I think that's what he said, but I don't know if I would completely agree here. I will say this is very just intellectual / conceptual that I'm talking now, because it was relatively, I think, suffering that even brought me to an extent into spirituality. And so I think for the most part, I can see what he's saying, and at least experientially, technically he's right. But from what I've been realizing and hearing, you technically don't, because I'm not suffering now at all, but I'm still seeking, still going deeper into this journey. And so, is suffering really needed? I don't know, but is suffering maybe what triggers most people to go inwards? Probably. Otherwise, people are living this blissful, in a way, blissful but unconscious way of life. And as a result, they're like, I don't need to go inwards, I don't need to meditate, I don't need to be meditative. They just, whatever, right? Just living freely, which is, it might sound okay, but usually it's under some sort of influence or some sort of dependency on another person, friendship, whatever. They're not at that blissful state by themselves. They need some sort of external stimuli, whether it's a phone, gadget, whatever. You get the idea. So I can see definitely where he's coming from, but I think I've also heard a lot of people get into this path and journey who weren't suffering. So I truly don't think it's needed for everyone, but I can see what he's saying, because I can connect with it myself. So this is a beautiful video. Love and appreciate Eckhart Tolle. Just a beautiful, beautiful energy. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, I would truly appreciate you hitting that like button and the subscribe button. Also, open platform here. Share your views on what I've shared, Eckhart Tolle shared. Let me know in the comments down below. With that, make this a great day. Take it joyful and stay conscious.